Okay, let's get right into it. For decades, there's been this steady, almost invisible stream of trucks moving from Ontario down into Michigan, and they're carrying something you probably wouldn't expect: trash. For a long time, it was just a simple economic arrangement, but that quiet deal, it is totally blown up. It's now a super high-stakes issue in North American trade, caught in this perfect storm of tariffs, politics, and environmental pressure. So today, we're going to break down how this cross-border waste stream became a full-blown geopolitical weapon. To really get a handle on the scale here, you have to start with this number: 3.44 million tons. That is the staggering amount of waste that Ontario ships to the United States every single year. We're talking about 1/3 of all of Ontario's disposed waste. It's a massive dependency that has almost overnight become a critical vulnerability. And that brings us to the big question of this whole explainer. For years, this was just about logistics. It was about economics, who could take the trash for the cheapest. But now, it's been completely transformed. How on earth did something as mundane as garbage disposal get tangled up in international trade wars and high-level political strategy? Let's dig in. All right, so we're going to unpack this whole thing by looking at 5 key parts. First, we'll start with the cross-border trash pipeline itself. Then, we're going to look at the tariff storm brewing down in Washington. After that, we'll see how this all plays out with 2 leaders who have very different agendas. Then we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty rules of the new trade deal, the USMCA. And finally, we'll talk about what it actually takes to be audit-ready in this crazy new environment. Okay, so first up, the pipeline itself. This is really the heart of the problem, this decades-old flow of waste that kind of set the stage for the conflict we're all seeing today. Ontario's reliance on Michigan it's profound. As its own landfills have been shrinking, the province has used Michigan as this sort of pressure release valve. And just think about that number for a second. Over 40 million tons of waste shipped there in just a 16-year period. This isn't some new trend. It's a deeply, deeply embedded structural dependency. And why? Well, it all comes down to simple economics. Just look at this chart. Michigan's state tipping fee, that's the cost to dump 1 ton of waste, is a measly 36 cents. Now compare that to the Midwest average of over $5, or Wisconsin all the way over here at $13. This massive price gap has basically turned Michigan into a financial magnet for the entire region's garbage. So you've got this huge, economically driven river of trash flowing south. Now, let's add the second ingredient to this perfect storm: the totally unpredictable and aggressive trade policy coming out of Washington. This is the thing that turned a local issue into a massive strategic liability. Right? So the trade landscape has just been chaotic. In February 2026, boom, the Supreme Court strikes down one big set of tariffs. But Washington doesn't even blink. Just 4 days later, they pivot and use a totally different law to slap on a new global surcharge. And this is all happening right before the mandatory review of the USMCA trade deal, where, you guessed it, these tariffs become powerful leverage. The pressure is just relentless. And this is the key. In a world of sudden tariffs and potential border closures, being dependent on another country for an essential service like waste management becomes a gigantic risk. That steady flow of trucks is now directly in the crosshairs. Michigan's landfills aren't just a cheap commodity for Ontario anymore. They're a strategic vulnerability that can be exploited in any trade negotiation. Okay, let's move on to the third piece of this puzzle, which is where it gets really interesting: the political players. On both sides of the border, you have 2 leaders with very different and often clashing agendas. So in Michigan, you have Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She's basically proposing a financial wall. She wants to hike that 36-cent tipping fee all the way up to $5. That's a nearly 1,300% increase. The goal? Deter Canadian waste and raise money for a massive environmental cleanup. Meanwhile, across the border, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford is using that same tariff threat to push for waste sovereignty, fast-tracking new landfills and arguing that the province just can't risk being cut off. And yeah, Premier Ford is not being subtle about it at all. This quote right here shows you exactly how he's using the fear of a border shutdown to push his own policy. He's explicitly turning that threat from Washington into political capital back home, using it to override local environmental concerns and get more landfills built fast. So we've got the waste, we've got the tariffs, and we've got the politics. But what are the actual rules of the game here? Well, that brings us to the USMCA, the big trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, and its incredibly complex, kind of maddening compliance gauntlet. So, at the very heart of the USMCA, you have what's called the rules of origin. Think of these like a passport for your products. If you can prove your goods are genuinely North American according to these very, very specific rules, you get to cross the border duty-free. You bypass the tariffs. This is the shield that protects you from that tariff storm. And proving it, well, that's everything. But these rules can be tricky. There's this one major loophole called rolling up. A manufacturer can take a component that's almost half foreign, like say 49.9% Chinese steel, and then they add just enough local content to get over the hump. And then the entire part can be legally reclassified as 100% North American, totally bypassing any tariffs. It's exactly this kind of thing that makes U.S. trade negotiators demand stricter enforcement on, well, everything that crosses the border. So, how do you prove you're not playing games with the rules? It all comes down to meticulous, verifiable documentation. The key document here is the Certificate of Origin. It's not just some piece of paper. It's a legal declaration that your stuff meets the standard. Without it, or if it has a mistake, that shield comes right down and you get hit with the tariffs. Okay, let's bring this all home. Given all the economic pressure, the political maneuvering, and these complex rules, how can any business possibly navigate this new reality? Well, it takes a whole new way of thinking. It means being constantly audit ready, because the cost of getting this wrong is severe. And we're not just talking about one shipment getting turned away. Nope. Failing to comply can lead to retroactive tariffs on shipments you made months ago, huge financial penalties, and getting flagged by U.S. Customs. That means crippling border delays and insurance costs that can go through the roof. The risk is just enormous. So here's the bottom line. The old way of doing business is completely over. That dump and forget model, where you could just load waste on a truck and assume it would get across the border cheaply and easily, yeah, that's broken. The combination of all this political, economic, and regulatory risk has made it totally obsolete. So what replaces it? A new model, one that's built on a foundation of perfect compliance. It requires documentation that is immutable, meaning it can't be changed, and is instantly ready for an audit at any time. The only way to really mitigate risk in this storm is to have your proof ready to go at a moment's notice. This whole situation has actually led to some really interesting ideas. For example, take this theoretical concept of a digital refinery. The idea is a digital workflow that can take a totally chaotic input, like a mixed stream of waste, and out the other end, generate perfect audit-ready documents, like a USMCA certificate of origin. A process like this could literally transform a potential liability into a verifiable, high-value asset. And all of this leaves us with one final big question. As supply chains get more politicized and trade gets more volatile, is this just the new normal? Is perfect, digitally verifiable, and instantly auditable compliance, is that no longer the gold standard, but simply the new price of admission to even participate in the global economy?